Hey friends! Today I'm going to show you something cool, and that is what are SvelteKit hooks and how to use them, for example. So what are even hooks? Hooks can mean different things depending where you come from, but in the case of SvelteKit you can think of hooks as middleware. But they're more special because hooks can attach themselves to some other events and trigger behavior based on that. So if you look at this example I made here, here is the client and the server. And usually you just send a request to the server and you get a response. But in case of middleware or hooks, we can basically hook into the request, right? We can change the request, which is going to change the response. And you can do a lot of things. We can use this for authentication, modifying the response. We can use it for error and performance logging, and even creating automatic routes. SvelteKit uses a special hooks file that can be run on the client or server, and it provides you with some server hooks like handle fetch, and some shared hooks like handle error. But instead of boring you with theory and exploring every API of hooks, I'm going to show you examples to spark your imagination, because you really might not use hooks ever. You're definitely going to encounter them if you use something like authentication, but even in that case the library you're using is just going to give you the hook you're just going to include in the hooks file. So let's really understand what are hooks and how to use them. Alright, so I'm inside a regular SvelteKit project and I'm running the development server. If you want to follow along, you can scaffold your own project, or you can just open StackBlitz and get up and running quickly. So let's write your first hook. And the most used and powerful hook you're going to use is the handle hook, which runs each time the SvelteKit server receives a request and it determines the response. So inside of our project, let's go to source, and in your source folder you need to create the hooks file. So I can say new file, and then I can say hooks. Let's create a server hook, so we're going to say hooks.server.ts. Let's close the sidebar, and now we need to create a handle function that we're also going to export. So I'm going to say export const handle, and the type for handle is handle, which should be auto imported from SvelteKit. And then we can also say async. Let's give it a function body like this, and that's it. So let's say that you didn't add this hooks file. What is the default behavior? And basically the handle function takes an input object. So this is going to be an input like this. And this has some interesting things. So if we look at it, we can say input. It has an event and resolve function. So we can destructure this in the function here. You can just do it like this. And this is how you're going to see it. In most examples, we can get event, resolve. And what is the default behavior in a SvelteKit application? So basically it returns the event, which is resolve. So this is the function resolve, and we're just going to say event. And if we save this, you don't have to restart your development server or anything like that. This should just work. So if we see, this is just the default behavior, because otherwise if you didn't include this, your editor would complain and now you get a nasty error. So let's get this back how it was. You can just refresh and everything should work fine. Alright, so let's change the default behavior, and let's say that for every page I want to instead return a banana. So instead of the default behavior, I can just remove this and I can say return. And what are we going to return? We're just going to return the response, right? Which is the web standard, as we already learned. So if we go to response MDN, and we can go here, and you can see the response interface of the fetch API, etc. And these are just web standards, right? So this isn't something that SvelteKit invented and etc. And this is the beautiful thing about this. So you can just say return, new response, and of course we can say it like this. And you're just going to get a text back, which is banana. But let's do something more fun, so we can add an emoji. Let's go banana. Let's save this. And now if you refresh this, let's also go to the network tab so you can see what's going on. I'm going to refresh everything, and we're just going to see that we get back a response banana, preview banana, right? And here in the headers, we can see this is just plain text. But also notice something interesting. What would be the default behavior when you go to a route that doesn't exist? It will return a 404, right, or not found. But basically here we're overriding this and we're just returning a banana for everything. So if we, for example, go to a route that doesn't exist, like banana, we're just going to get the banana back. Nope, we get back the banana, right? So this is really interesting. So let's say that we want to be more precise, and how would we do this? So basically we can just look at the path name, and then if it starts with some route, then we can just change that route and return the default behavior. So how can we do this here? We can just go here and we can just, let me just make space. We can say if, now we can from the event get URL, which is really interesting. So remember, we previously in SvelteKit seen this event object, which has everything like cookies fetch, and etc. And you always come back to this object. So this was really something that we dove into in the earlier parts. So we can just take the URL, we can get the path name, so we can say, hey, does this start with some URL? We can say banana. And now in that case, we just want to return a banana, right? Otherwise, we're just going to return the default. So we can say return resolve event. And now if you refresh this, everything looks the same as before, right? But now when you go to our specific route, banana, then you're going to get back the banana. And this really might not seem like a lot, but you just created a route through code, which can be useful if you're making some library and don't want to make the user create a new route. Let's look at an example how hooks are used for authentication in SvelteKit. And usually the authentication flow is that you have some route like /login or whatever, the user fills in the form, then you authenticate them and set the cookie. So now you can get the cookie here from the event. So for example, you can have something like this, session, event, cookies, get, you can get the session. And now you can ping your database. So you can say await get user, you can pass the session. But this really is just an example and this really isn't important. I just want to focus on something way cooler, which is, for example, now that you make a request inside your endpoint, like for example, /admin, and you want this user information. So how can we get this data inside of our endpoints? And for this, you can populate the event.locals object, which is going to pass extra data to a request. So you can do it like this. You can say event, not event counts. You can just say event.locals, and you can name this whatever you want, pass whatever information or data you want. But in this case, I just want a user, so I can name it test. And now, if this user is authenticated, we can just populate this information for our entire application. So let me show you how this is really awesome. Alright, so in the sidebar, I'm going to go through routes. I was going to create a new file and let's create a user route, and this is going to be a standalone endpoint. So you can say server ts, and because I'm using the SvelteKit extension, we have some snippets. So I'm going to say kit endpoint, and I'm just going to hover over the slide ball. We can see add import from types, and it's just going to import it for us. And here you can see, here's something interesting, right? Again, so here's this event object, but if we destructure it, we're going to see it has everything, including locals. So as you can see, it contains custom data that was added to the request from the handle hook. And now we can do this, and I'm just curious if it's going to work if we just say locals. So remember, on the locals we have user, so you can just do it like this. And now we can save this. Actually, let me just rename this locals. And now if we go to /user, we can just get back the user, or you can log it out or whatever else you want. Alright, and this is cool, but let me show you actually what you do most of the time when you do authentication in SvelteKit. So if I go back here, I'm just going to close this. I'm just going to create a +layout.server.ts file, because remember, in a previous part we learned that data sent from a layout load function gets merged with data in child routes, and this also becomes available in the page.data store. So how does this really work? And we can really ignore this so it's not confusing. We can just delete this, gone. So now inside our routes we can just say +layout server ts, and then we can just say kit load like this, and the load function is going to be layout server load. So this is going to actually, what is going on? Let me just do layout server load. Okay, this is going to import it for us, which is really awesome. And now again here, this is the same event object, right? So let me just destructure this locals, and now what we can do here is we can return this data for all the child routes. And this is how this works. This is why when you try to use any auth library, etc., they're going to make you do this. They're going to make you get the locals from the layout server ts file, and now you can say return user. So we can say locals user. And now you save this, and this becomes available in your child routes through the data prop, and also becomes available on the page.data store. So let's see how something like this is really useful. So when I go to the sidebar, I'm just going to go to the plus page svelte, and now I'm going to create a script. This is a snippet I have, and now we can say import. We're going to import the page store from app stores, and now inside of here, we're going to get access to the information inside. So we can say if page data user, and we can just say welcome page data user. And since we have the user here, it's going to say, hey, welcome test. And how awesome is this? And this is basically because inside of our layout, whatever you return here gets merged in the data object in your child routes, but this also becomes available in the page.data store in SvelteKit. And because this runs on every request, we can authenticate the user, so we make sure nothing is wrong, and this is going to get updated, and this is going to get updated in your file. So basically that's really the most simplest authentication flow in SvelteKit. Let's look at how we can use hooks to transfer HTML. And why would you want to transfer HTML? One real world example I can immediately think of is internationalization. So for example, in your app, you have different languages and you can change between them, right? But that's really not enough, because if I press Ctrl P, app.html, so this is the default template in SvelteKit, you also need to somehow replace this in your HTML markup, so the language attribute, which really isn't great to always leave it on English, right? So in this case, you're going to see this if you use an internationalization library, so you don't really have to worry about it, you have to do this yourself. But let's do something cheeky here. So we can just say %, and then let's just give it a placeholder, right? So this is something that we can target ourselves. And now we're going to save this, and now we can go back to the hook, and we can do something really special here. So I'm going to remove this line. So inside your hook, you can get the locale from your cookie or whatever. So this is going to be something like locale, and you're going to be like event cookies get locale, or however you set it up. Again, you don't really have to worry about this if you use an internationalization library. They're just going to give you the instructions. But let's say, for example, that I want to use Croatian, and now since I picked that language, again, remember, now we can also pass it for our entire app. So we can say event locals locale. Yeah, this is a mouthful. Try saying that a couple of times. Now we can say locale, right? And this is really warning us because we also need to specify the type inside app.dts if you're using TypeScript, but this really isn't important, so I'm just going to ignore it. And let me just put it here. And now here is the fun part. So when we return resolve event, same as before, but now we can pass some extra options here. So you can pass it an object, but what we want to use is the transform page chunk, which is a really funny name if you ask me. So we can just do this, and this is basically just a function which is going to return something. And inside of here, we have access to a couple of things like done and HTML, but basically this is going to give us the HTML of the request as a string. So you really have to be careful in this case that you don't mess up the HTML because it might not be properly formatted. But in this case, what we can do is a simple replace. So we can say HTML replace, and now remember we have our %lang, which we're going to target, and we're going to replace it with locale that we got from the cookie or whatever. And now you can see already it kicked in. It really thinks we're using Croatian, right? So now when I open the developer tools, let me just zoom in. And now if you go to the elements here, you can see the language is set to Croatian. And how awesome is this? Alright friends, so let's look how we can use hooks to measure page load speed. So hooks are really useful for something like measuring performance and error logging, which we're going to look in another example. But for now, I have this problematic page which you probably wouldn't know about in development. It takes 2 seconds to load, right? So it would be really useful if we can log out a console log message only during development. So here is this problematic page. I just have a sleep function, it takes 2 seconds, but let's see how we can measure this using hooks. So the first thing, I want to know what page is slow, right? So let's just remove this, and I'm going to say const route, and we can get the route using event URL, and now we can start the performance measuring, which is really simple. So we can just say let start, and we can use this useful function. We can say performance now, and now we can do whatever. So we can say response, so we're going to measure how long it takes for the response. And we're going to resolve it right here. And now we can say let end, and we can say performance now again. And now this is going to give us back our performance, but to have the response time, we can just say let response time. So we're going to take the end and we're going to say minus start, or we're going to subtract the start from the end. All right, cool. And that's it basically. So we can just say something like if response time is bigger than 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds, right? We can just say console log, and now we can give it backticks. Let's say turtle, because emojis are fun. And now we can say route took, and now we can say response time. Just do it like this, response time, and we can say milliseconds. And I'm also going to use 2fix, so it's not a large number. It's going to round it to 2 decimals. And this is really awesome. So let's just copy this over. Just going to do it like this. And now we can say if response time is below 1 second, we're going to use a rocket. And that's basically it. And also, since we already have this response right here, right? We just have to say return response. And before I save, let me just open our terminal. And here we have it here. Now this should log turtle if I save this. So let's see, this is going to take 2 seconds. Awesome. And now we get back our turtle. And now it says the route and how long it took. So if I go back here and if I just remove this, to just give us back our rocket, and how awesome is this? As you can see, it only took 24 milliseconds. Let's look at how we can use hooks for error handling. In this case, I'm throwing this error, and as you can see, because this is an unexpected error in SvelteKit, SvelteKit is going to strip this message and is going to strip the stack trace. So we're only going to get this internal error message. You might have some gremlins in your code and want to send error reporting to a service like Sentry or LogRocket, and this is a perfect use case for the handle error hook, which is a shared function, meaning it's the only hook that works inside hooks.serverTS and hooks.clientTS. And the handle error function is going to run if an unexpected error is thrown during loading or rendering. So let's see how that works. Here in our hook, we have the default handle hook. We can just delete everything and we're going to export the handle error hook. So we can say export const handle error. We can use handle server error. This is just going to import it. And now we can say async like this. And now we can destructure the error and the event, not svent, which is really interesting, event like this. And now you can do whatever you want. Basically, this is it. So you can say console log error. And now if we open the terminal, it's going to say error, but we can actually log out the actual error. We can say error. Let's save it. You can see here is the error, so it doesn't hide the stack trace and etc. But if you want, you can also change what is returned. So you can say return, and we can specify whatever you want, message, ID, whatever. You can say yikes, exclamation mark, let's give it a nice emoji. And now instead of internal error, you're going to get back yikes. And this also becomes a part of your page data store, so you get access to this inside your error page, so you can customize this even further. Let's see how we can use hooks to modify a fetch response. For example, let's say that I want to use HTTP or HTTPS for every request, so we can use the handle fetch hook, which is a hook to modify a fetch request inside a load or action function which runs on the server. So here I can just remove all of this code. I can say export const handle fetch, which has the handle fetch type. And now from here we can destructure request and fetch. Let's give it a function body. And now we can just listen to the URL. So we can say request URL. If it starts with HTTP, then let's change the request. So we can first replace the URL. So we can say request URL replace. And now let's replace HTTP with HTTPS. And now we can reassign the request. So we can say request, again, just using web standards. We can pass in the URL and the original request object. And now I can even console log out request URL. And before I save it, we also need to resolve it. So we have to return fetch request. And let me just open the terminal. So here we use HTTP, and now we change the request, and this should log out HTTPS. So let me just save everything, and you should see everything works as expected. And how awesome is this? Let's look at an awesome use case for hooks, which is parsing form data. You already know that working with forms is a pain, even if you're using SvelteKit and it makes everything easy for you. How this works is basically you just submit what you have, right? And then you have some form actions here. But now you need to get the form data, you need to validate or loop over each field before you can pass it to something like Zod, and this is very tedious. So what if you could just make a hook that parses that form data for you and just gives you the parsed form data? And you can. Let's look at how we can achieve that. So first I'm going to go here to hooks, and I already have a handle hook here, but I'm also going to use another library, which is parse form data, and this is going to take care of the parsing for us, so we don't really have to even think about it. We can import it from parse nested form data. So let's see how we can make this work. So I'm just going to remove this so we know what's going on. And now we can just listen to the request, and if the method is post, right, which is from our form, then we know it's a form request, and we can parse the form data. So we can say if event request method is equal post, and now we can get the form data from the request, so we can say const form data await event from the request form data. And now we can parse the form data into a JSON object using this package we imported. So I can say const data parse form data, and I can pass form data. And also let's not forget to include async here. And before, we're not done yet. So how do we make it available inside our actions here? So remember, we already learned about locals, and we can do the same trick here to pass the form data to the request. So here I can go and just say event locals form data, and we can just pass it the same data. How beautiful is this? And now don't forget, we need to resolve the event like this. Let me just save it. And now here, let me just log out locals. So now we don't have to parse the form data, and how awesome it is. So let me just save this. I'm going to open the terminal. Let's say for the username test, password 1234, and let's say remember me, and now they should parse the form data for us. And how beautiful is this? So we get the form data object, username test, password, and this is really a weird thing when you submit forms. It's since everything is a string, it's not a boolean, so the value is on going to be for a checkbox. And we can even just say form data here. Let me just do it again. Test 1234, remember me. And now you can pass this to Zod or whatever. Let me show you another beautiful thing about this library, parse form data. For example, you can do different things with it. And if you want to pass some values to null or boolean, for example, you can go to the value, in this case, remember. And now for this library, you can use ampersand. And now look what's going to happen when I say, for example, test 1234, remember me, is going to convert it to a boolean. So you can see username test, password 1234, remember true. And how awesome is this? And also, if you're using TypeScript right here inside your app.dts, you're going to have an error here because you haven't typed locals. But let's go to app.dts. And now here where your interface is, previously we had user, I can just remove this. But now you can specify this type form data, which is a record string of type unknown, and now you won't get an error anymore. Alright friends, in the last example, let's look at how we can use multiple hooks together. So you're going to see this when you're using a library that gives you a hook. It's going to have a different name. Of course, you don't have to use event for the name, right? But what if you have multiple hooks then? So for example, here I have an auth hook, which is going to deal with authentication. Here I have an internationalization hook that's going to deal with the internationalization. And basically, to use multiple hooks together, you can use the sequence helper function from SvelteKit, and everything is going to work great. So let's see how we can do that. And we can just say export const handle. We can import sequence from SvelteKit, and now we can pass it all the hooks you have. And that's simple as that. Okay, so now if we open the terminal before I save it, so you can see here it is imported from SvelteKit. And now we included all of our hooks, so you can save your hooks for later and reuse them. And now when we save it, we can see our auth hook ran and our internalization hook ran. Alright, so that's it. SvelteKit hooks are very powerful, and I hope you now understand how they work and when to reach for them if you have to. If you found this useful, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want to support me, you can find my Patreon in the description. Thank you for watching, and catch you in the next one. Peace!